Hello. Today I'm going to be featuring the HMS Hood, the upcoming Tier 7 Premium Royal Navy battleship. Now, this has been requested a lot, but unlike many others who quickly released their commentaries, I wanted to do some additional testing on this ship because, unlike many others, I actually quite enjoyed the Hood. I like the unique playstyle of this ship. Now, one of the first things that probably pop out is the sheer size of this thing. The Hood is massive. It's like, if you have to compare it, it's like a Yamato Tier 7 or maybe a Montana, since it's so massive. First thing we notice is one of my DDs who spawned at A is actually sailing towards the middle. Now, this is a pretty huge issue for me because the Hood does not deal well with DDs. That's one of the things it straight up does not deal well with. So if my scouting DD decides to bail, and I know there's a DD in A since it's being capped, then I have no other option but to turn away. The reason for this is this ship, as with many huge ships in this game, has pretty poor maneuverability. It has a massive 910 meter turning circle, but on the other hand, if you slot the rudder shift module like I do, you can get a 12.6 second rudder shift, which isn't too bad considering like the Scharnhorst has an 11.6 with the module, so you get fairly close, but the huge turning circle is still an issue. And of course, it only has an 18% torpedo belt as well, so when you got a huge size and a huge turning circle and a low, fairly awkward, or well, I would say fairly bad torpedo belt, those are of course all reasons to avoid torps and avoid DDs in general. But on the bright side, when you have big ships in this game, wargaming tends to equal ship tonnage with HP. So you have a pretty impressive 67.7k HP, which is, I think, more than any other Tier 7 ship. It's more than any other battleship. And this ship is pretty insanely tanky for that reason. It's very well armored. The main deck alone is 51 millimeters, both at the back turrets and around the entire superstructure. The armor on the sides comes up all the way to the deck and is very strong, making those areas practically immune to HE. Only the superstructure really in the middle. The bow is 25 millimeter, which means overmatch could be a real threat. But considering you tend to sit angled in the ship, or you should you should sit extremely angled in the ship at all times, you don't really suffer from overmatch at all. So the citadel on it, hidden very low in the ship, angle as well, it's sloped behind multiple layers of armor, so unless you really give them that flat broadside, you're unlikely to be citadeled either. So with all this armor and all this tankiness and all this HP, this ship has all the makings of a great tank. The guns, for two gun turrets of 381 millimeter guns, very slow turret traverse, 60-second by default, so you pretty much have to use expert marksman to get it down to 48.6. But these guns have insane firing angles. In fact, you might look at the firing angles I'm showing right now as I'm sailing away. I can easily shoot my full broadside backwards towards the Algerie from this angle. So these turret angles combined with the armor allows the ship to become insanely tanky. In fact, I've been playing this ship up for this reason alone, and I've even spec'd fire prevention on it. So one of the big threats to battleships, which is HE and fire damage, I've been able to nullify that a lot as well, which has all added to this insane tankiness this ship has. The shells are quite slow, 431 meter per second. And anyone who has played a Warspite should be pretty familiar with that number. And it allows for some pretty neat lobbing of shells. You can lob shells over islands and such and catch a lot of unsuspecting ships off guard, which I quite enjoy. Sadly though, the Sigma is only 1.8, which is probably my biggest complaint with this ship, is the fact that the Sigma is only 1.8. But I'll return to that a bit later. And now, one other thing you might notice is that the ship has defensive AA. Now, the AA on the ship really isn't strong enough so that when you pop defensive AA you'll be able to actually slaughter planes or anything similar. But it is strong enough that if you get targeted by a carrier, you can usually focus down or heavily cripple one squad. And the way I've been playing it is whenever a carrier goes for me, I pop defensive AA and I focus target the torpedo bombers. Because of the torpedo belt, those are usually the biggest threat. You focus down the torpedo bombers and then you just allow the defensive AA to split up the rest of the bombs so they have very poor accuracy. And you can quite easily tank these carrier hits without issues. And because of course the ship, as I said, very tanky when angled, great turret angles but poor traverse, it has all the makings of a ship that doesn't really want to move that much. You kind of want to sit there angled, being this huge, being this threat, this sponge that just soaks up all the damage. And of course being forced to turn broadside because you have to turn into torpedo bombers would be a huge weakness. So having the defensive AA really complements this playstyle extremely well, because you make sure you don't have to be dodging any torpedo bombers with this thing. So that's I think it fits really excellently with this. So of course huge turning circle, poor turret traverse, strength of the armor but only really when angled. All these things combined of course point away from any sort of brawling. You don't want to be brawling in this thing, absolutely not. This is not a brawling type of ship, and well, you only have to take one look at the turret traverse and you should understand that. Now, I don't really consider the ship nearly as bad as others have made it out to be. Even against tier 9 matchmaking, I've been able to just sit there and soak up an absurd amount of hits. The armor has had no issues with holding up against them. And I actually quite like the unique ship design. I think this ship plays differently than any other. And the fact that you can just sit there and soak up damage like no other is quite hilarious, and it plays differently, and I enjoy that. And I think the biggest problem this ship has is that most people don't really appreciate the tanking capability of the ship, and it's not really something you can look up on the stats. You can't go and look and wow, I have an average tanking, I've tanked this and this much potential damage in this ship. You can't really look that up in the stats. And people don't really tend to value it. People tend to tunnel vision a lot on the damage charts. Now, also tanking capability is something that is criminally misplayed in this game. People don't really value it or understand it at all. I mean, look at German battleships. German battleships are the best brawling battleships in the game right now. Oh, talking about lobbing shells, Belfast, I peek him around the island, sailing around. I lob my shells over the island. Blop. They really don't see it coming, and they really don't expect it. He even goes in chat, what? It has no idea what the hell just happened. Anyway, moving back on. Tanking capability, as I said, it's Bismarcks, Friedrich Grosses, Grosse Korfors, Tirpitzes. These are the ships you are most likely to see at the backline sniping, even though they are the best brawling ships. So people, I think the biggest strengths of the Hood, which is this tankiness and so things, they are kind of going to be wasted. But I still think that they should implement the ship very much like it is, because just because many people won't understand it, the people that do understand it and appreciate the ability will be able to make use of it, which I quite like. However, I spoke of the 1.8 Sigma. That's something I would like to see changed, because the Warspite has 2.0 Sigma, and I feel like the Hood also deserves 2.0 Sigma, especially what you're going to be up against tier 7. It would also make it a bigger threat and something you kinda want to shoot at, even though you know it's going to be tanking a lot of your damage. You feel obliged to shoot at it because you want to get rid of that 2.0 Sigma threat that you can deal a lot of damage. So in terms of buffs, I would like to see the Sigma change from 1.8 to 2.0. But other than that, I actually quite like this ship. I mean, it's a ship that relies very heavily on angling and positioning, because you want to be actively dodging torps, you want to be angled, and you want to be sitting in positions where all your tanking capability has an influence on the outcome of the game. And tanking, angling and positioning are two things the average player really isn't that good at. I mean, we can look at some of the other reviews of the ship that we've been seeing, and this past couple of days where they've been slamming the ship, and that's a pretty good example of people don't really know how to make use of those capabilities. So I think the way the hood is now, it's going to get a pretty lukewarm reception, but I actually quite like the ship. I like the ability to just soak up damage. You just sit there and the sheer amount of potential damage you can soak up in this thing has been absurd. And I mean, I've had games where I've literally had every other tier 7 battleship shoot against me. I've had a Nagato, I've had a Gneisenau, I had a Colorado, all of them sitting back and trying to kill me, and I just sit there and absorb all the hits and pretty much laugh at them, and that feels pretty hilarious, especially since you're still able to bring your full broadside. Because look at these firing angles, you see how angled I am? I'm still able to fire both front and back guns against this Scharnhorst, and these angles are amazing, and you just have to make use of them to really get something out. The weakness is, of course, the Sigma, as I mentioned. For example, here's an example of a volley. That tends to happen a bit too often. So the Sigma increase would be the best upgrade I could see for this ship without drastically changing the way it plays. Now, the ship itself loses a lot of tankiness if you don't angle, though. That I need to point out. I got to experience it firsthand when I gave broadside to a Rune. Now, Rune is not something you automatically associate with insane damage, but this heavily armored upper belt that this ship has, which makes it very strong when angled, if you give broadside to German cruisers, it seems that German AP gets full penetrations on it. Not overpens, not bounces, but full penetrations. It was a fairly close range, but the amount of damage he was able to pump out was absolutely insane. I melted faster to that Rune than I melted to any other battleship, including Friedrich der Großes and stuff like that. I completely got destroyed in seconds in the game. So angling an absolute must-have in the ship, which is probably why it's going. The current reception is quite lukewarm, to say the least. Anyway, this game that I showed in the background ends 121k damage, not too special. I mean, we did top the charts, which is of course always pretty nice, but more importantly, if we look at the stats of this game, we can see I tanked 103,000 damage in a tier 7 ship, and not too much potential damage in this one, but I can show you some other games. For example, this one, the one where I spoke of, where I tanked, you can see the guys I fought, a Colorado, a Nagato, and there was another tier 7 battleship, and plus others shooting at me. In this one I tanked 102k damage, and look at my potential damage, 3.1 million potential damage when fighting equal tier battleships. So this ship can just withstand battleships so heavily. It laughs at battleships trying to damage it, because the armor scheme and the way you can angle in it just makes it so strong at just soaking up any sort of heavy AP hits, and that's been very amusing to play around. And might as well show some examples of playing against tier 9. As I said, against tier 9 you can even perform quite well. This one had a carrier and still able to beat multiple tier 9s, and just able to soak up so much damage and have such an influence on the outcome, because if they see a tier 7 battleship and they think, wow, that's something we can just blast off the face of the earth, this is going to be an easy kill, and then they do no damage, and they're like, what the hell just happened? Like, and even when they do a lot of damage, 67.7k HP with 5 heals with Superintendent, you're going to be sticking around for a long time, unless you get broadside or unless you torpedoes. Those are the two weaknesses. But ultimately, a Sigma buff for the hood is something I would love to see, because I value accuracy on battleships extremely highly. But other than that, I think the playstyle it has is pretty unique and pretty fun, and I think when people start figuring out just how strong this ship is at soaking up damage, maybe we'll see some more popular opinions. I do believe though that the Sigma buff is quite necessary. Other than that, the playstyle is pretty cool. Anyway, that was my first impressions of this hood, which is No doubt going to be changing. I'm pretty sure it's going to be changing considering the reception it has received. So I will return to it once Wargaming decides to change this ship around. Hopefully they won't go into two extremes, because we really don't need another overpowered tier 7 ship. Anyway, that was all for me.